The easiest way to learn who people really are is to become someone they think doesn't matter. Ethan Harrison would remember those words for the rest of his life, because on a gray Tuesday morning in downtown Chicago, they led him to a moment that changed everything. The sound came first. Not a shout. Not an argument. Just the sharp splash of coffee hitting the polished lobby floor of Harrison Financial Tower. Conversation stopped. Keyboards paused. Heads turned. Ethan tightened his grip on the mop handle and looked up from the marble tiles he had been cleaning. A young woman stood frozen near the reception desk. Her white blouse was stained with coffee. Her cheeks burned with embarrassment. Around her, dozens of employees pretended not to stare while secretly watching every second. Unbelievable! A supervisor muttered loudly enough for everyone to hear. Do you ever do anything right, Sophie? The woman lowered her eyes. I'm sorry, Ms. Parker. It was an accident. Her voice was soft. Respectful. Almost too respectful. Ethan felt something twist in his chest. The supervisor sighed dramatically and shook her head. Maybe if you spent less time daydreaming and more time paying attention, this company wouldn't have to clean up after your mistakes. A few employees exchanged uncomfortable glances. Nobody spoke. Nobody stepped forward. Nobody defended her. Sophie Carter simply nodded and grabbed paper towels from a nearby station. Then she knelt on the floor herself, cleaning the mess while people walked around her as if she were invisible. Ethan had spent 6 months pretending to be a janitor. 6 months hiding the fact that he was the son of billionaire businessman William Harrison. 6 months listening, watching, learning. He had met hundreds of people. Executives who bragged about kindness while insulting waiters. Influencers who spoke about compassion while ignoring struggling coworkers. Investors who smiled in public and mocked people in private. But Sophie was different. Every morning she greeted him. Every morning she asked how he was doing. Not because she wanted something. Not because she knew who he was. Simply because she believed every person deserved respect. Ethan watched as she finished cleaning the floor. The supervisor walked away without another word. The crowd dispersed. Within seconds it was as if nothing had happened. Sophie stood slowly and adjusted the strap of her worn handbag. Ethan noticed the frayed stitching near the corner. He noticed the faded shoes she had repaired more than once. He noticed the exhaustion behind her smile. Then something unexpected happened. Sophie walked over to him. Sorry about that, she said quietly. I made more work for you. Ethan blinked. She was the one who had been humiliated in front of an entire lobby, yet she was apologizing to him. It wasn't your fault, he replied. She offered a small smile. Still, thanks for always keeping this place looking nice. Then she headed toward the elevators. Ethan watched the doors close behind her. Around him, the building returned to normal. Phones rang. Shoes clicked across marble. Meetings resumed. But Ethan couldn't shake the image of Sophie kneeling on that floor while everyone looked away. For the first time since starting his experiment, he stopped thinking about finding a wife. Instead, he found himself wondering a much more dangerous question. Why did the kindest person in the building always seem to be the one carrying the heaviest burden? That night, long after most of the employees had gone home, Ethan sat alone in a corner office on the 48th floor overlooking the Chicago skyline. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed a sea of light stretching for miles, but he barely noticed the view. His attention remained fixed on a security camera recording from the lobby earlier that morning. He watched Sophie Carter clean the spilled coffee again. Then again. Then one more time. Not because he enjoyed seeing her embarrassed, but because he could not understand her. Most people changed when they thought nobody important was watching. Most people became impatient, rude, or self-centered. Sophie had been publicly blamed for an accident, yet she had still apologized to him afterward. Ethan leaned back in his chair and rubbed his temples. 6 months earlier, his father had issued what sounded like a simple challenge. William Harrison had built Harrison Global into one of the largest financial empires in America. He trusted numbers, contracts, and market forecasts. What he did not trust was human nature, especially when it came to his son. "Every woman you meet already knows your last name," his father had said. "How will you ever know who loves you and who loves the fortune?" At first Ethan dismissed the concern. Then he started paying attention. Lavish charity events, private clubs, luxury vacations. Everywhere he went, conversations seemed to begin with curiosity about his wealth. Eventually he grew tired of wondering whether anyone saw him beyond the family name. That was when the experiment began. He cut his expensive hair shorter, stopped wearing designer suits, learned basic maintenance work from one of the company facility managers. Within weeks, Ethan Harrison disappeared. In his place stood Ethan Brooks, a quiet janitor earning $22 an hour. What started as a temporary test slowly became something else. For the first time in years, people spoke honestly around him. Executives ignored him. Employees walked past without making eye contact. Some treated him kindly. Others acted as though he were invisible. The experience revealed more about human character than any boardroom ever could. Yet Sophie remained a mystery he could not solve. The next morning Ethan arrived before sunrise. The building was nearly empty except for security guards and a few early staff members. As he pushed his cleaning cart through the hallway, he noticed a small light glowing from one of the accounting offices. Curious, he glanced through the glass wall. Sophie sat alone at her desk. The digital clock on her monitor read 6:12 a.m. Her workday did not officially start until 8. A stack of reports nearly a foot high covered her desk. She looked exhausted. Ethan watched her take a sip from a paper cup before returning to her spreadsheets. Then he noticed something unexpected. She opened her purse and carefully counted several dollar bills. Not many. Maybe $20. Maybe less. After a few seconds she wrote numbers in a small notebook. Her expression tightened. Then she erased something and wrote new figures. Budget calculations. Ethan recognized the look immediately. It was not frustration. It was survival. Later that afternoon, another clue appeared. Sophie skipped lunch. Again. While coworkers ordered sandwiches and salads from a nearby cafe, she remained at her desk drinking water and answering emails. Around 3 o'clock, her phone rang. Ethan happened to be replacing a trash liner nearby when he heard her voice. "Hi, Mom," she said gently. Her face brightened for the first time all day. "Did the pharmacy call you back?" A pause followed. The smile faded. "Do not worry about it. I will figure something out." Another pause. "No, please do not skip your medication. I mean it." Ethan looked away before she noticed him listening. But one thought echoed in his mind for the rest of the afternoon. Sophie was carrying far more than office deadlines. And whatever burden she was hiding, she was facing it completely alone. Sometimes the smallest discoveries change everything. Ethan did not learn the truth about Sophie through secret investigations or private reports. He learned it through a rainstorm. 3 days after overhearing her phone conversation, dark clouds rolled over Chicago just before sunset. By 6 o'clock, heavy rain hammered against the glass walls of Harrison Financial Tower. Employees rushed toward parking garages and train stations, eager to escape the weather. Ethan finished mopping the lobby entrance and watched the crowd disappear. Then he noticed Sophie. She was standing alone beneath the building's awning, clutching a worn umbrella that had clearly seen better days. Most people would have walked toward the nearby parking structure. Sophie did not. Instead, she started walking north through the rain. Ethan frowned. The nearest train station was in the opposite direction. Something about it felt strange. 20 minutes later, after changing out of his work uniform, he found himself driving several blocks behind her. He told himself he was simply curious. Nothing more. The rain continued falling in steady sheets as Sophie crossed busy intersections and passed rows of apartment buildings. Then she turned into a neighborhood Ethan had never visited before. The area was safe enough, but clearly struggling. Older buildings, faded paint, small businesses fighting to survive. Sophie eventually stopped in front of a modest pharmacy. Through the windshield, Ethan watched her disappear inside. 15 minutes passed. Then 20. When she emerged, she carried a small white prescription bag pressed tightly against her chest. She checked her phone, glanced at the dark sky, and continued walking. Ethan expected her to head home. She did not. Instead, she walked another 8 blocks to a small brick house with a sagging front porch. A light turned on before she even reached the door. An older woman opened it immediately. Sophie smiled. The tired expression Ethan saw every day at the office vanished completely. For a brief moment she looked genuinely happy. The older woman pulled her into a hug. Sophie laughed softly and handed over the pharmacy bag. Then they disappeared inside. Ethan sat motionless behind the steering wheel. Something about the scene stayed with him. There had been no luxury apartment. No expensive lifestyle. No signs of comfort at all. Yet Sophie had smiled more during those 10 seconds than he had seen in weeks. The next morning brought another surprise. Ethan arrived early and found a small brown paper bag sitting beside his cleaning cart. Inside was a fresh blueberry muffin and a handwritten note. "Thank you for always working so hard. People notice more than you think. Have a good day. Sophie." Ethan stared at the note for nearly a minute. Nobody had ever left him anything during the entire experiment. Not because he was Ethan Harrison. Not because of money. Simply because someone appreciated him. He folded the note carefully and slipped it into his pocket. Later that afternoon, while sorting maintenance requests, he overheard 2 employees talking near the break room. "Did you hear about Sophie?" one asked. "No." "What happened?" "Apparently she turned down another promotion." Ethan looked up immediately. Turned down a promotion? That made no sense. Sophie clearly needed the money. "Why would anyone do that?" the second employee asked. The first shrugged. "The new position required relocation to New York. She could not leave because of her mother." The conversation ended as quickly as it began. But Ethan felt another piece of the puzzle slide into place. Sophie was sacrificing career opportunities to care for family. She was working longer hours than anyone else in the department. Skipping meals. Stretching every dollar. Carrying responsibilities most people never saw. And somehow she still found time to be kind. As evening approached, Ethan glanced through the accounting department windows. Sophie sat alone once again, finishing reports after everyone else had gone home. The office lights reflected against the glass. Outside, the city glowed beneath the fading sunset. She looked small sitting there by herself. Smaller than the burden she carried. For reasons he could not fully explain, Ethan suddenly realized he was no longer observing her as part of an experiment. The line had quietly disappeared somewhere along the way. What began as curiosity was becoming something far more dangerous. Because for the first time in years, he was starting to care. Sophie did not know she was being noticed. That was part of what made her different. Most people changed when attention found them. They straightened their posture, adjusted their tone, and carefully selected every word. Sophie remained the same whether she was speaking to a senior executive or the man pushing a cleaning cart down the hallway. Over the next 2 weeks, Ethan found himself noticing details he had missed before. She arrived before almost everyone else and left after most employees had gone home. She never complained. Never gossiped. Never joined conversations where coworkers criticized one another. Yet despite her quiet nature, she seemed to carry an invisible weight that grew heavier every day. One Thursday afternoon that weight finally revealed itself. Ethan was replacing light bulbs in a conference room when he heard raised voices from the hallway. Not angry. Frustrated. Concerned. He stepped outside and saw Sophie standing near the elevators with a young man who looked to be in his early 20s. The resemblance was obvious. Same eyes. Same smile. Same stubborn expression. Her younger brother. "Tyler, you promised me," Sophie said softly. "I know," the young man replied. "I am trying. Trying is not enough anymore." Ethan stayed out of sight while they talked. The college already extended the deadline twice. Tyler lowered his head. I lost a part-time job. Sophie closed her eyes briefly. The reaction lasted only a second, but Ethan saw it. Exhaustion. Not anger. Not disappointment. Pure exhaustion. Then she reached into her purse and handed him an envelope. Take it. Tyler immediately shook his head. No, take it. Sophie, this is your rent money. I will figure something out. Ethan felt a chill run through him. Tyler stared at the envelope for several seconds before finally accepting it. I am sorry, he whispered. Sophie forced a smile. Just graduate. That is all I care about. After he left, she remained standing alone near the elevator. For a moment she looked completely drained. Then the doors opened. A coworker stepped out. Sophie immediately smiled and greeted them as though nothing had happened. The mask returned. The burden disappeared behind it. At least for everyone except Ethan. That evening another piece of the puzzle emerged. Ethan was reviewing maintenance schedules in a small storage office when he accidentally overheard a conversation between two managers. Did accounting finish the audit reports? One asked. Sophie did most of them herself. Again? Half the department keeps dumping extra work on her because she never says no. Ethan frowned. Does management know? Of course they know. The answer came with a laugh. That is exactly why they keep doing it. The conversation moved on, but Ethan remained frozen. Suddenly the picture became clearer. Sophie was not merely struggling financially. People were taking advantage of her kindness. At home. At work. Everywhere. The next morning brought a moment Ethan would not forget. He entered the employee break room shortly before 7 and found Sophie sitting alone near the window. A single instant oatmeal cup sat in front of her. Nothing else. No breakfast sandwich. No coffee. No fruit. Just oatmeal. She appeared to be studying a stack of bills while calculating figures on her phone. Her expression tightened. Then she quietly removed one bill and set it aside. Another followed. Then another. Eventually she folded everything neatly and slipped the papers back into her purse. Ethan pretended to organize supplies nearby. A few minutes later Sophie stood and walked away. After she disappeared down the hallway, he glanced toward the trash can beside her chair. A crumpled receipt rested near the top. He should have ignored it. Instead he looked. The receipt was from a pharmacy. The total exceeded $400. Ethan stared at the number. $400 for medication. $400 from someone who skipped lunch and worried about rent. $400 from someone supporting a mother and helping a younger brother stay in school. For the first time since beginning his experiment, Ethan felt ashamed of how little he understood the lives of ordinary people. He had spent years searching for someone worthy of trust. What he never expected was to find someone carrying so much pain while asking for absolutely nothing in return. The moment that finally broke Ethan's heart arrived on a cold Friday evening just after 7 o'clock. Most of the lights inside Harrison Financial Tower had already gone dark. Cleaning crews moved quietly through empty hallways. The city outside shimmered beneath thousands of lights. Ethan was finishing his rounds on the 22nd floor when he noticed Sophie leaving the accounting department carrying a small cardboard box. At first he assumed she was taking work home. Then he noticed the contents. A framed family photo. A sweater. A coffee mug. Personal belongings. His stomach tightened. Sophie walked quickly toward the elevator, her head lowered. Something was wrong. Very wrong. Ethan waited until she disappeared downstairs before crossing the hallway. The accounting department was nearly empty except for 2 employees speaking near the printer. I still cannot believe they blamed her, one whispered. Neither can I. She worked on that project for weeks. Does not matter. Jason Reed needed someone to take responsibility. Ethan froze. Jason Reed. The ambitious senior manager everyone seemed desperate to impress. Did Sophie say anything? One employee asked. The other shook her head. Of course not. She never fights back. Ethan felt a knot form in his chest. He returned to the service elevator and headed for the lobby. By the time he arrived, Sophie was gone. The next morning he learned the rest. Through quiet conversations and overheard remarks, the story emerged piece by piece. A financial report had been submitted with several critical errors. The mistakes originated in another department. Everyone knew it. Yet somehow responsibility had landed on Sophie. The official explanation made little sense. The unofficial explanation made too much sense. Jason Reed had protected someone important. Sophie had become the easiest person to sacrifice. She had not been fired. Not yet. But she had been removed from a promotion list and placed under formal review. Months of work vanished overnight. Ethan spent the entire weekend thinking about her. On Monday morning she returned to work as if nothing had happened. She greeted coworkers politely, answered emails, organized reports, smiled when people spoke to her. Yet something had changed. The spark he occasionally saw in her eyes was gone. By late afternoon another clue appeared. Ethan was cleaning near the underground parking garage when he noticed Sophie sitting alone inside her car. At least he assumed it was her car. Then he looked closer. The vehicle was more than 20 years old. The paint was faded. One headlight was cracked. Several boxes filled the back seat. Blankets were folded behind the driver's seat. Ethan stopped walking. A terrible realization washed over him. People did not keep blankets and storage boxes arranged like that unless they spent time living in their vehicle. He remained hidden behind a concrete pillar, while Sophie stared silently through the windshield. After several minutes she opened a notebook. Inside were pages covered with calculations. Rent, medical expenses, tuition payments, utility bills. Ethan could not read every detail from a distance, but he saw enough. Then Sophie removed something small from her purse. A ring. Delicate. Old. Beautiful. She held it carefully beneath the parking garage lights. Her grandmother's ring. Ethan somehow knew immediately. The kind of keepsake families pass from one generation to the next. Sophie stared at it for several seconds before her eyes filled with tears. She quickly wiped them away and forced herself to smile. Then she placed the ring inside a small jewelry box. Ethan felt as though the air had been knocked from his lungs. Suddenly everything made sense. The skipped meals. The extra hours. The constant exhaustion. The sacrifices. Sophie was running out of options. And now she was preparing to sell the last valuable thing she owned. Not for herself. For her mother. For her brother. For everyone except herself. The realization hit Ethan harder than anything he had experienced during the entire experiment. He had expected to discover greed, deception, hidden motives. Instead, he had found a woman quietly giving away pieces of her own future so the people she loved could keep theirs. As Sophie started the aging engine and slowly drove out of the garage, Ethan remained standing alone in the shadows. For the first time since he began pretending to be someone else, he no longer cared whether the experiment succeeded. Because somewhere along the way, the woman he had been observing had become the woman he could not stop thinking about. And watching her lose everything while carrying the burden alone hurt far more than he ever imagined possible. The following week began with an announcement that changed the atmosphere across the entire building. Harrison Financial Tower would host its annual executive networking gala in less than 10 days. For most employees, the event represented opportunity. Promotions were discussed there. Partnerships were formed there. Careers often changed there. For Sophie, it became one more source of stress. Ethan noticed it immediately. The moment the email arrived, conversations erupted throughout the accounting department. Coworkers excitedly discussed stresses, reservations, and networking strategies. Sophie simply stared at her computer screen before quietly closing the message. Later that afternoon, Ethan overheard another conversation that made his concern grow. "You are coming to the gala, right?" one employee asked Sophie. Sophie hesitated. I am not sure. Not sure? Everyone important will be there. Sophie forced a smile. I have some things to figure out first. Ethan already knew what those things were. The event required formal attire, transportation, time away from her second responsibilities, expenses she could not afford. Yet what happened next surprised him even more. Jason Reed appeared. Confident as always, dressed in an expensive tailored suit despite it being a normal workday. Several employees immediately straightened in their seats when he entered. Jason had mastered the art of making people nervous without ever raising his voice. Sophie, he said with a polished smile. Can I speak with you for a moment? Ethan continued replacing supplies nearby while keeping one ear open. Sophie stood reluctantly. Of course. Jason lowered his voice. I notice you have not responded regarding the gala. I am still considering it. You should attend. His smile widened slightly. Actually, I would like you to attend with me. Sophie looked genuinely surprised. So did several nearby employees pretending not to listen. That is very kind, she replied carefully. But I do not think that would be appropriate. Jason's expression barely changed. Why not? Because I prefer to keep work and personal matters separate. The answer was polite, respectful, direct. Ethan felt an unexpected sense of relief. Jason, however, did not. For a brief second something cold flashed behind his smile. Then it disappeared. Of course, he said smoothly. I understand completely. He walked away without another word. But Ethan did not miss the disappointment hidden beneath the polished exterior. Neither did Sophie. The next several days brought subtle changes. Extra assignments began appearing on Sophie's desk. Deadlines grew tighter. Questions about old reports resurfaced. Nothing dramatic. Nothing obvious. Just enough pressure to make every workday harder than the last. Ethan watched it happen piece by piece. One evening he found Sophie alone in a conference room, reviewing hundreds of pages of financial documents. The clock on the wall showed 8:43 p.m. You are still here? Ethan asked gently as he emptied a nearby trash bin. Sophie looked up and smiled. Apparently I am becoming part of the furniture. He laughed. She laughed too. For a moment the exhaustion disappeared. You should go home, Ethan said. It has been a long day. The smile softened. Home is complicated lately. The words slipped out before she could stop them. Ethan noticed her expression change immediately. Regret. She was not used to sharing personal struggles. Sorry, she added. Forget I said that. But Ethan could not forget it. Because he had already seen the blankets in her car. He had already seen the financial calculations. The pharmacy receipts. The sacrifices. Every clue pointed toward the same painful truth. Sophie was holding everything together by sheer determination. And that determination was beginning to crack. As she returned to her paperwork, Ethan quietly walked away. Yet one thought followed him through every hallway of the building that night. Jason Reed had not accepted rejection nearly as gracefully as he pretended. And if Ethan's instincts were correct, the real trouble had not started yet. The trouble arrived faster than Ethan expected. 3 days before the gala, the atmosphere inside the accounting department shifted completely. Conversation stopped when Sophie entered a room. Coworkers avoided eye contact. A few looked sympathetic. Others looked nervous. Nobody explained why. By noon the reason became painfully clear. Sophie had been called into a meeting with human resources. Ethan only learned about it because employees could not stop whispering afterward. Allegations had surfaced regarding financial discrepancies connected to several internal reports. Documents had been reviewed. Questions had been raised. Sophie's name appeared repeatedly in the discussion. Ethan felt disbelief wash over him. Nothing about the accusation matched the woman he knew. Yet rumors spread through an office faster than facts. By mid-afternoon people were already speculating. Some defended her. Others remained silent. Silence, Ethan realized, was often more dangerous. Shortly before 5 o'clock he saw Sophie leave a conference room. She looked pale. Her hands trembled slightly as she carried a folder against her chest. For the first time since he had met her, she did not smile at anyone. Not even him. She walked straight toward the elevators. Ethan followed at a distance. Outside, cold winds swept through the streets of downtown Chicago. Sophie crossed the sidewalk and sat alone on a public bench overlooking the river. The city moved around her. Taxis passed. Pedestrians hurried home. Nobody noticed the woman sitting quietly with tears gathering in her eyes. Ethan remained several yards away, unsure whether he should approach. Then Sophie's phone rang. She answered immediately. "Hi, Mom." Her voice brightened for exactly 2 seconds before fading again. "No, everything is fine." Ethan closed his eyes. Even now she was protecting someone else from worry. "How was your appointment?" she asked gently. A pause followed. Then another. Sophie listened carefully. "That is wonderful news," she said. "See? I told you the treatment was helping." She smiled despite the tears still visible in her eyes. "No, do not worry about me. I am just tired." The call ended a few minutes later. Sophie remained seated, staring at the river. Eventually she opened the folder from Human Resources. Ethan could not read the documents from where he stood. He did not need to. The expression on her face told him everything. She was losing hope. That realization hurt more than he expected. Because Sophie had fought through every setback he had witnessed. Financial pressure. Family responsibilities. Career sacrifices. Long hours. Public embarrassment. Yet something about this situation felt different. This attack struck at her integrity. At the one thing she had never compromised. The next morning matters became worse. An internal email circulated to department leadership. Nobody showed Ethan directly, but fragments of conversation reached him throughout the day. Formal review. Administrative restrictions. Suspended access to certain systems. The language sounded professional. The impact was devastating. Shortly after lunch, Ethan overheard Jason Reed speaking near the executive elevators. "These things are unfortunate," Jason said with practiced concern. "But accountability matters." The executive standing beside him nodded. "Do you think she will recover professionally?" Jason shrugged. "Some mistakes follow people." Ethan watched from across the lobby. The words sounded reasonable. The timing did not. Something felt carefully arranged. Deliberately positioned. Like dominoes falling exactly where someone intended. That evening, after most employees had gone home, Sophie returned to her desk one final time. She opened drawers. Organized files. Packed a few personal belongings into a cardboard box. Ethan felt his pulse quicken. Was she leaving? Had she already given up? As she carried the box toward the elevator, she stopped beside his cleaning cart. For several seconds neither spoke. Then Sophie managed a faint smile. "Thank you," she said quietly. Ethan frowned. "For what?" Her eyes softened. "For always being kind when nobody else noticed." Before he could respond, the elevator doors opened. Sophie stepped inside and disappeared from view. Ethan stood frozen long after the doors closed. Because for the first time since beginning his experiment, he knew one thing with absolute certainty. Someone was trying to destroy the best person he had ever met. And he was running out of time to stop it. The gala arrived on a Friday evening beneath a sky filled with winter stars. Limousines lined the entrance of the Harrison Grand Hotel while executives, investors, and industry leaders stepped onto a red carpet that stretched across the marble entrance. Crystal chandeliers illuminated the ballroom. A live orchestra played softly in the background. Conversations flowed effortlessly between people dressed in elegant gowns and tailored suits. Yet among all the luxury, one person felt completely out of place. Sophie stood near the entrance holding a simple navy blue dress she had borrowed from a friend. The dress was beautiful but modest. She had almost decided not to attend. In fact, she had spent nearly an hour sitting in her car debating whether to leave. But a final email from Human Resources had changed her mind. The formal review of her conduct would continue after the gala. Her future at Harrison Financial remained uncertain. If this truly became her last chance to be seen by leadership, she wanted to face it with dignity. As she entered the ballroom, she immediately noticed people whispering. Some smiled politely. Others looked away. Rumors had already spread further than facts. Sophie lifted her chin and continued walking. Across the room, Jason Reed stood surrounded by executives. The moment he saw her arrive, satisfaction briefly flashed across his face. He quickly concealed it behind a welcoming smile, and raised a champagne glass towards several investors. Everything appeared normal. Everything appeared under control. But tonight was not unfolding according to Jason's plan. On the top floor of the hotel, far above the ballroom, Ethan stood inside a private executive suite overlooking the city skyline. The janitor uniform was gone. For the first time in 6 months, he wore a black tailored suit bearing the Harrison family crest. Beside him stood William Harrison. "Are you certain?" his father asked. Ethan nodded. "More certain than I have ever been." William studied his son carefully. "Then it is time." Downstairs, the ballroom lights suddenly dimmed. Conversation slowed. The orchestra stopped playing. Hundreds of guests turned toward the main stage as a spotlight illuminated the podium at the center of the room. Confused murmurs spread through the crowd. This announcement was not listed on the evening schedule. Sophie glanced around uncertainly. Jason frowned. Then the master of ceremonies stepped onto the stage. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, "please welcome the founder and chairman of Harrison Global, Mr. William Harrison." Applause thundered across the ballroom as William appeared beneath the spotlight. Sophie had only seen photographs of him before. The billionaire's presence commanded immediate attention. He smiled warmly before raising a hand for silence. "Thank you all for joining us tonight," he began. "This evening is particularly special because I would like to introduce someone who has spent the last 6 months learning about this company from a very different perspective." Confused expressions appeared throughout the room. Jason exchanged a puzzled glance with another executive. William continued, "For years I wondered whether leadership could truly understand people from behind executive doors. My son decided to answer that question himself." A second spotlight illuminated the staircase above the ballroom. Silence fell instantly. Sophie looked up. Her breath caught. A man began descending the stairs. Perfectly tailored suit. Confident posture. Familiar eyes. Her heart stopped. Ethan. Not Ethan the janitor. Not Ethan Brooks. Ethan Harrison. The heir to a multi-billion-dollar empire. Gasps echoed across the ballroom. Several executives stared in disbelief. Jason's face drained of color. Sophie remained completely motionless. Her mind refused to process what she was seeing. Every conversation. Every smile. Every shared moment. Suddenly they carried an entirely different meaning. Ethan reached the stage and accepted the microphone. His eyes scanned the crowd only once before finding Sophie. For several seconds either looked away. Then Ethan spoke. 6 months ago I came here pretending to be someone ordinary. What I discovered changed my life. Because the most valuable person in this company was never sitting in the executive offices. A stunned silence settled over the room. And for the first time, every eye in the ballroom turned towards Sophie Carter. For several seconds nobody moved. The ballroom remained frozen beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers as hundreds of guests followed Ethan's gaze towards Sophie. She wished the floor would open beneath her feet. Her heart raced so fast she could barely hear the whispers spreading around the room. Ethan Harrison. The billionaire heir. The quiet janitor who had shared simple conversations with her near elevators and break rooms. The man who had listened without judgment. The man she thought she knew. Ethan stepped forward and continued speaking. During the last 6 months I met extraordinary people. Talented people. Successful people. But one person taught me more about character than anyone else in this company. Sophie felt every eye. settle upon her. Across the ballroom, Jason Reed shifted uncomfortably. The confidence he carried all evening had vanished. Ethan looked directly at him. I also discovered something troubling. I discovered that integrity is often ignored while politics are rewarded. A large screen behind the stage suddenly illuminated. Confused murmurs swept through the crowd. Documents appeared. Internal emails. Project timelines. Audit records. Ethan's voice remained calm. Over the past week, an independent review team examined the allegations involving Sophie Carter. Silence deepened. The findings were clear. She was not responsible for the reporting errors attributed to her. Gasps echoed throughout the ballroom. Sophie stared at the screen in disbelief. Additional documents appeared. Email approvals. Revision histories. Authorization records. Every piece of evidence pointed away from her. Then another name appeared repeatedly throughout the timeline. Jason Reed. Several executives exchanged stunned looks. Jason's face turned pale. The review also found that critical information was withheld during the original investigation. Ethan continued. Information that would have immediately cleared Sophie's name. A member of the board slowly rose from his chair. Another executive followed. The atmosphere shifted completely. For the first time all evening, nobody was looking at Sophie with suspicion. They were looking at Jason with questions. William Harrison stepped beside his son. Effective immediately, a full leadership review will begin, he announced. And Ms. Carter's professional record will be restored in its entirety. Applause erupted across the ballroom. Sophie could barely breathe. Weeks of fear. Weeks of humiliation. Weeks of uncertainty. Gone in a matter of moments. Yet relief was not the only emotion she felt. Because standing on that stage was also the man who had hidden the truth from her. Ethan slowly descended from the platform and approached her. The applause faded as guests sensed something deeply personal unfolding. Sophie looked at him. You lied to me, she whispered. Ethan lowered his eyes briefly. Yes. Every day. Yes. The honesty surprised her. No excuses. No explanations. Just truth. I never meant to hurt you, he said quietly. Then why? Sophie asked. Ethan took a slow breath. Because I spent my entire life wondering whether people cared about me or my last name. I thought I was searching for answers. What I found was someone who reminded me what kind of person I wanted to be. Tears filled Sophie's eyes. Not from sadness. From exhaustion. From everything she had carried alone for so long. Ethan reached into his pocket and removed a folded piece of paper. The small handwritten note she had left beside his cleaning cart weeks earlier. I kept this with me every day, he said. Not because it was valuable. Because it reminded me that kindness still exists. Sophie's hand trembled as she looked at the note. Around them the ballroom seemed to disappear. There were no executives. No billionaires. No investors. Only two people standing in the middle of a life-changing moment. Several weeks later, spring arrived in Chicago. Sophie's mother continued receiving treatment without financial fear. Tyler completed his final semester at college. And for the first time in years, Sophie allowed herself to imagine a future that belonged to her as well. One afternoon she stood beside the river where she had once sat alone carrying the weight of the world. Ethan joined her. No disguises. No secrets. Just Ethan. They watched the water flow beneath the afternoon sunlight. Do you regret meeting me? He asked. Sophie smiled softly. Sometimes. Ethan laughed nervously. Sometimes? She looked at him and squeezed his hand. Only because you made it impossible to